Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Barry Saleho.
On behalf of ICLE Africa,
the African Centre for Cities,
Our Future Cities,
Red Cross Crescent Climate Centre, and partners,
we're excited to welcome all of you
to the Rise Africa 2022 Action Festival.
Rise Africa has been growing since 2020
as a platform for thinkers,
doers,
and enablers,
committed to inspiring action for sustainable cities.
This year's theme is
creativity.
For me, this means blending skills to be able to communicate the climate change complexity in rapidly urbanizing cities.
We are walking dynamites of creative expression, whether it be in the arts, in the sciences, or in tech.
There are so many people in the African continent who have a huge skill base and are creative in the way they approach challenges.
Creativity in Africa is about embracing our own. It's about dynamism and it's about embracing our indigenous knowledge.
I think agency is finding ways of giving power back to people, to groups, to young people, especially on a continent where it's a very young population.
One should be taking ownership and the responsibility to create an Africa that they would like to live in, as well as leave behind for the future generations.
I think what agency means to me is change from the ground up.
The importance of urgency is the recognition of the past and the recognition that we've lost time.
Urgency is about acting now to build more inclusive, productive, and resilient cities.
There's this need to creatively redesign and unlearn and explore new ways of thinking.
The festival is hosting 33 sessions
with 135 provocateurs from across Africa and the world.
Every session aims to show new ideas,
showcase ongoing action,
and launch new initiatives, bringing participants together
to chart a new route forward.
We hope that the festival program will inspire you.
At the festival, we encourage you to showcase your business and projects,
build lasting partnerships,
unleash your creative potential,
commit to sustainable action.
Rise Africa is about translating ideas into action. What actions are you going to commit to this festival?
Before the session begins, it is important to note that you're being recorded.
And by participating, you are given the consent to be recorded.
All recordings will be available on the program page after the festival. Creative expression is vital for creating new futures for our cities.
And so we invite you to enter this session in the spirit of creativity and dreaming.
L'Afrique est fatiguée de se retrouver dans l'obscurité. Elle est fatiguée de naviguer contre les courants de l'industrialisation. L'Afrique me dit qu'elle est fatiguée de se reposer au feu du bois. Il est donc temps de faire sauter les compteurs. Éclairons l'Afrique, libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel. Accélérons le rythme cardiaque de son développement. Libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel. Transformons l'enveloppe énergétique de l'Afrique pour stimuler son développement. Car la nature nous a tellement gratifiés de ses richesses. Changeons l'histoire, éclairons l'Afrique, donnons un bout de lumière à chaque foyer en Afrique est une possibilité. Changeons l'histoire, éclairons l'Afrique. Libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel.
Okay, I think now it's time to start our session. How's everyone doing? Are you guys ready? Okay, let me start sharing my screen and then we can start the session. Can everyone see the session okay? If you guys can give me a thumbs up or something, that would be great.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So welcome to the session. It's called Guided Organic Growth. And basically what we're going to be doing here is together we're going to be rethinking new city making in Africa. My name is Haba Al-Hanafi. I'm an urban researcher at the Shorter Cities Institute, a think tank that is based both in DC and currently in Lusaka in Zambia. And my background is in urban planning. I'm an urban planner by trade, and also I did grad school in development studies. My interests are basically anything urban, anything about the future, the intersection of the future and histories of urbanism, and the legal side of urbanism as well. I'm completely obsessed about modern architecture for some reason. I know that a lot of people think it's ugly, and I love its ugliness. And I love building in public parks. And why I'm guys telling you all of like my interests is because this is gonna be somewhat of a, like a very interactive session. So we're gonna be talking, we're gonna be filling out murals, we're gonna be doing a lot of things. So it's important that we get to know each other. The last thing that you need to know about me is that I'm currently based in Lusaka, Gambia. So if anyone is visiting or anyone is from Lusaka, please contact me, reach out to me on my email, and you're welcome in our head offices here in Lusaka. Just a couple of things for the session. As we said, it's going to be very interactive. So we're going to go into breakout rooms in a certain point in this session. So please, if anyone cannot communicate very well in English and their main language is French, please indicate that in your name. Change your name, just put FR next to your name, so we can put you in a breakout room where there's a fresh interpretation. Please do that now, so because we're going to be going into breakout rooms a bit soon. The second thing, I have my camera open, and if I mean, of course, this is up to you, but if you guys can have your camera open so we can see each other, that would also be great, and especially in the breakout rooms. Okay, so yeah. Yes, thank you guys for people who are indicating the French language. Please don't forget that. Just a quick introduction about the Institute. So Shorter Cities Institute is a think tank that focuses on better urban governance to lift tens of millions of people out of poverty. It is a non-governmental organization dedicated to building the ecosystem for shorter cities. If you want to know more about the Institute, please, or about shorter cities movement in general, just head to shortercities.org. The thing that we are celebrating today, it's Africa Freedom Day. It's actually an off day here in Lusaka, but it's okay. I'm working. I'm here with you guys. Yeah, happy Africa Freedom Day for all of the countries that are celebrating, and for all of us. Let's start with something that I really enjoy doing. We're gonna start with like an ice-breaking activity, and we're gonna start with an urban rant. We're gonna send you right now a link to a mural, which you guys have to kind of like sign up to join. So please sign up to the mural, and then I want you to quickly think, don't overthink it, about something that really drives you crazy in the built environment of your city. Anything, it can be the transportation takes forever, or I don't know, the streets are always not clean, like something that's like drives you insane on a daily basis. Take a sticker and just write it down. I'm gonna share my screen again so you guys can see what you can do. So here's so yeah, this is exercise number 1. If you guys can start joining, you can then take one of those stickers and just write your rant on them. So personally, I'm gonna just take a sticker and write no. Anyone is having problems with that, please let us know. Yes, you have to make an account. Yeah, for some reason the invite was not open today, so please make an account and just start ranting. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna give you guys 2 more minutes. We all are passionate about cities here, but I know that there are certain things about cities that drive us crazy. So let's get to our systems because we have like an hour and 45 minutes to just like talk about cities. So yeah. I see a lot of people haven't joined the mural just yet. We're gonna be using this mural throughout the session, so I think it's better that you guys start, you know, signing up now, trying to figure it out for the first exercise, for the second and third exercise, which require more of like a teamwork. Then we can, you know, be very familiar with using mural. I'm gonna be adding some of the things that you guys are sending in the chat, but again, we're gonna be using this a lot, so let's also. Okay, 2 more minutes. Is anyone having a hard time joining the mural? No. You can write in the chat or just like let us know. Okay, so I think you guys have to sign up for the website, for the app, so we can sign up for the app so you can actually start editing. So please do that because we're going to be using this throughout the session. Thank you. Mike and Malonga, please let us know if you can now access. Okay, while other people continue please joining throughout the session because as I said, we're gonna need this for the exercise number 2 and exercise number 3. This is a lot of, this is more of like a workshop session, so please sign up for this. And yeah, and who really kind of wants to talk about their problem? Like I can start talking, but I would rather somebody just like takes over and just tell me what pisses them off a lot about their city. I know that Nimke, you talked about gentrification in Amsterdam and land prices and pressure. I mean, the floor is yours if you want to kind of tell us a little bit about it. If you want to unmute yourself and just like tell us something about the gentrification that's happening in Amsterdam or the land prices problem. If anyone else wants to like jump in, just unmute yourself and say something.
No, sorry, I'm there.
Yeah.
I was still registering for Mural. Yeah, it has always been this way, but over the last perhaps 10 years, it's gotten worse. And you see a lot of people, there is so much potential in the city, people and businesses, and they start, but they always have very short contracts to start something for the neighborhood or start a bakery or a workplace, and you don't invest. So you're there for half a year, and then there's enough attention given to the place, and but it's not only that, it's also that what is built after is always too pricey for first buyers, and there's no well available rental houses anymore. So it's either expensive rental or social rent, and for social rent you have to subscribe, and people have registrations for 20 years before they get it. So there's this gap, and that's why there's a lot of protest at the moment, because the city is for those who want to invest their money in property. Yeah.
Oh, okay. One of the things that we're gonna hopefully be discussing through this session is how pricey new developments are always, and like the mismatch between the needs of more affordable housing and what is actually being built.
I think it's next year that probably a law will pass that you can only buy a house if you're gonna live in it. So that will make a huge difference. Germany already went in that direction. So it might, but I'm not sure how far. If it's only for new to be built houses or also for existing housing stock, and so it's a good turn, but it'll take time before you'll see the fruits of it.
Exactly. That's a very interesting thing to be angry about, and I'm pretty sure it's persistence. I'm pretty sure you're kind of always angry, and I am too. So does anyone else want to tell us a little bit of the problems that they're having? Someone raise your hand, just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yes, I think I just wanted to reflect on something that's similar to what has been mentioned around like housing crises. I live in Cape Town, and something that I've observed in my neighborhood is a growing homelessness problem. And so for me, the frustration comes in that I don't necessarily see what the state is doing to support this challenge. And it's not to say that the city is not doing anything about it, but it's not as evident. The ability to respond to these problems is slower than the rate at which homelessness is growing. And I think it ties well into issues around accessibility to housing and human settlements and where people are actually able to be placed. I think just a little bit of history on South Africa. In 1994, we transitioned from apartheid, and although there have been a lot of strides to move past that, you're still seeing a lot of the effects of that time period and the remnants of it, which is where people choose to be located versus where access to opportunities to income are.
Thank you so much for your input. And of course, homelessness ties to like the rising prices of housing, and just like a whole vicious cycle that you can't get out of. Okay, one more chance for one more rant before we start. If anyone wants to, please either raise your hand or unmute yourself and go ahead. Okay, if no one is interested in ranting, which is weird for me because that's what I like to do all the time, just talk about cities and what I like or not like about them, we can start the session actually. Oh, Nadia, I want to go. Go ahead.
I could say one thing. Okay, it's similar to what I think it was Yukuda was saying. About the housing situation. That's one thing. I'm talking about Nairobi. Yeah, because I used to live in Nairobi for some time, and other than the housing situation, it was also how the city is quite focused on transport. On cars, more on cars than public transport. So there's no footpaths, which also links to what there was another post. Someone was saying someone doesn't feel safe enough to walk on the streets. There's no footpaths also to contribute to that. So this also leads to social spaces where people can gather together, and there's kind of small situations here that the best.
Thank you so much, Nadia, for sharing. This is also actually like one of the things that drive me insane in a lot of African cities. It's like how everything, all over the world actually, how everything is very car oriented, right? And like you have to actually make your like this little kind of spaces where we can walk in, or like nowhere we can pass actually like from one side to another. So yeah, this is me also on a daily basis because I like walking actually. Thank you, Nadia. And now with our last urban brand, we can go back to our presentation. You guys can see it, right? Cool. Okay, so what actually we're gonna do in this session, since we got the ranks out first, we're going to talk a little bit about our new cities in Africa, the history and where they are now, and then we're going to do like a critique of new city making approaches in Africa. Part 2 is going to be focused more on the guided organic growth, the paradigm that we're going to present to you tonight, and the discussions we're going to have around that. And then part 3, we're going to do a little bit of reflections on what we talked about so far. I think you've seen in the last slide, you have this like little cute green box. So a green box means it's a fun activity, and by fun activity, it means that I'm going to take a backseat and you guys are going to be doing stuff on the mural board or in breakout rooms or something like this. So you can see in part 1 and part 2, I'm going to be talking a little bit, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms. And then you guys are going to be talking to each other. And in the third part, unfortunately, you're going to hear me talk for like 10 minutes straight. So you're going to have to bear on me with that. But like part 1, part 2, you guys get to actually talk. So again, please, if you have a problem with the English language and you need interpretation, or your number 1 language, native language is French, please indicate that in your name so we can put you in a room that has a French accessibility. And again, if you still haven't signed up for Murer, please sign up because we're going to be using it around the session. And yeah, let's start. Just a reminder that a lot of the things that I'm going to be presenting here are based on a research that we've done in the Social Institute, a flagship report. Actually, it's called the Planning Guidelines. We're gonna send you the link to the planning guidelines right now. It basically outlines an approach for a more sustainable urban planning for specifically new cities. And it has 3 main parts. The first part is the city development guidelines, second part is the urban planning guidelines, the third part is the mobility guidelines. It's a bit of a longer document, so what are we going to be focusing on in this session? It's just the city planning guidelines, but the document is accessible and free for everyone, so please feel free to dig a little bit more into and yeah, reach out if you have any suggestions or questions about any of that document. So yeah, let's start with part 1, and we're gonna start talking about like the history of new city making in the continent and the current paradigms that are happening in the continent, and then we're gonna do a nice breakout room session where we're gonna critique everything about new city making. So yeah, so let's start with the past, which is something that I love always to talk about, is pre-colonial city making in Africa. And we can see cities like medieval Benin City in southern Nigeria, pretty well advanced, had even bigger walls than the China walls. They were sustained by trade. They had a huge, very complex governing system. And one of the most interesting things about the Benin City, its connections to other urban and semi-urban cities around it. In a lot of the description and a lot of the things that we read about Benin City, it shows that it's one of the earliest cities in the world to have street lighting, to have actually wide streets where people can walk. I really suggest you guys, if you're more interested to know about Benin City, to go to the Guardian stories of cities about Benin City. It's really interesting. Another city that we can discuss in pre-colonial city making in Africa is Kilwa-Kitwani, which was a beautiful city-state that kind of coexisted with a lot of other city-states on the East African coast. It did a lot of trade within the interior of Africa with other places, Oman, Saudi, or even all the way up to China. It maintained its own independence and a very specific governance system, and it was a very pretty, thriving city. One more city I want to talk about is Alexandria, Egypt, which is actually a little bit older than all of this kind of things. Another very well-planned city from the start, and a lot of people talk about how Alexandria, the city making that happened in Alexandria 3,000 years ago, kind of guided planning for many years or new city planning for many years to come. And I didn't just put Alexandria because it's my hometown. I put Alexandria because it's actually an important city and also my hometown. And then after all of this kind of like different cities that throughout Africa were built, and there's very strong urban history that is often not just not studied, but also not mentioned in a lot of urban history books, came colonial city making. And colonial city making, we can talk about this for like a whole other session, but I'm just gonna take one example of one city that I'm currently based at, which is Osaka. And the city was actually planned from the ground up when they decided to move the capital to here. It was based on garden city principles. It had a lot of like spacious roads, lots of trees, and the tree legacy is still kind of apparent in a lot of the cities right now, in a lot of parts of the city. So it was actually like planned beautifully, quote unquote, but it was actually quite problematic because it was only planned for Europeans. The native population actually wasn't allowed to live in the city. They were only allowed there to work, and they had to have registration papers and passports, and their access to the city wasn't the same, and their family didn't even have access to the city. So Lusaka is a city that is kind of completely planned from the ground up at a new city, not for the native population. So without going a lot of details of colonial city making left a history of exclusion and segregations in most, if not all, of the occupied cities in Africa, which left three major things, right? It left weak representation of local governments. The cities were always under national authorities or national colonial authorities. It also didn't plan for urban growth. We see a lot of those new cities that were constituted during colonialism based on principles like the Garden City or these kind of principles, which are infamous for not really planning for growth. And the disconnect that the colonial powers had to traditional ways of building made cities such a disruption in the history, the story of urban growth in Africa. And the most important thing is the insufficient infrastructure that those kind of planning paradigms have left with us. Since we talk about exclusion and segregation, we can see that like townships all over Africa are, of course, don't have enough or any access to infrastructure, where you see the places that were mostly kind of colonial or something, they have actually quite sufficient infrastructure. And we still have to kind of live with that history up till now. The first time that we see again a wave of new cities that happened was post-colonial new cities. A city like Abuja and a lot of other cities around Africa were seen as a pride of national identity. It was a thing to pride yourself on and to kind of start a new chapter. So a lot of the 1960s, early 1970s post-colonial cities were about national identity, were also projects for economic stimulations. 10th of Ramadan in Egypt is basically an industrial city, which is actually doing somewhat well. That was started being built in the 1970s and 1980s, and it was basically an economic project for the city. If we now go into contemporary new city making, we're gonna easily put most of the projects that are happening on the continent right now into three main models. First, the Chinese grid planning model, which it basically looks like every other Chinese city. The lanes are big. Everything is planned from the ground up, all the way to even the furnishing of the housing. We can see that model in, for instance, Kalimba New City in Angola and in many other cities around the continent. The second model that is being copied a lot also in the continent is the American suburban model, although right now there is a lot of movement away from planning like you live in a suburbia, and like now we're seeing how problematic it is. It's actually one of the leading models of new city making in the continent right now. So it's still a city or a new town like Sheikh Zayed in Egypt. It's also very suburbia-like, segregation of functions, very not dense at all. And yeah, this is the second model. The third model is basically what you can call it the international model. I always call it like the Dubai, Singapore model. This is kind of happening in kind of Konza Techno City right now in Kenya, which is kind of under construction. It all has this like monumental structure that is aiming to attract investments and just, yeah, and it's had also kind of monumental, very high-rise structures, but not with a lot of economic thinking behind it. It's more about the monumental of architecture. So yeah, now I just talked like very, very kind of briefly on the history and kind of planning paradigms of new cities in the continent. And now what we're gonna do is that we're gonna put you in breaking rooms, right? Breakout rooms. And we're gonna give you around 10 to 15 minutes, hopefully, of you thinking about those contemporary new cities that are happening around you in the continent. So my question is, what do you think of contemporary new cities? If you don't have any new city projects that are happening around you or you have knowledge of, you have enough time to kind of like Google them, look at the pictures, look at the things that are happening. And let me share my screen again with you guys to tell you exactly what we're gonna do. So yeah, we're gonna go to the mural board and we're gonna split everyone into 3 breakout rooms. So breakout room 1, that's for team 1, breakout room 2, team 2, breakout room 3, team 3. Just start copy pasting those sticky notes and just write about both the opportunities and challenges of new city making in Africa. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? Why do you think that? Do you think, I mean, I don't really believe anything is good or bad in its own, but there are positive and negative to everything. So please start working within your kind of circles. And then after that, we're gonna have like a 5 minutes of reflections and discussions on your the idea that you write here. Please be as blunt as possible. This is what we're gonna do into the breakout rooms. Please have those discussions before you start writing things down. And then we're gonna all as a group have a discussion together. Christy, if no one had indicated, again, this is your last chance. If English is not the language that you would love to talk into, please indicate it in your, change your name, put like next to it, FR or something. If not, we're then they're gonna send everyone into English speaking rooms. So yes, Christy, okay, before we go to breakout rooms, does everyone understand exactly what we're gonna do, right? If anyone had a problem, this is your chance. Unmute yourself and ask me a question. Hey, I'm seeing more faces. How was the session, guys? Good. Okay.
Too short.
Very short, right? Yeah, we don't have enough time for everything, but it's a very like a a snapshot. I'm gonna share my screen right now, and please, if anyone from Team 1 can unmute themselves and just tell me what they discussed or like the main points that they want to share with us.
I'll step in for Team 1 because I was handling the board.
Okay.
So some of the observations were that the site is often treated as a clean slate and sometimes literally bulldozed to a perfectly flat surface that just ignores everything that was there before, the vegetation, the culture, the history. And that's, I think, one of the big challenges is how do you plan around what's already there and use that as a starting point rather than treating it as if it doesn't exist. And linked to that lack of greenery. So often these visions, particularly the photos you showed, just don't seem very livable or appealing, kind of treating people like numbers rather than people. There's a tension between the look of international cities and the relevance. So there's a kind of aesthetic that and an assumption of the type of activities that would take place there that ignore, the economic activities that are already there or the things that work for that context. And the informal trade is often pushed out entirely and not part of that vision. The focus of development is often on urban CBDs, ignoring villages, neighborhoods, and the peri-urban, and all the services and resources go into that at the expense of other areas rather than more evenly distributing those. Urban planners work with those with power or for those with power. So often the other perspectives aren't built into the plans. And even where there are visions or plans, they're seldom executed due to political changes and other things or just events that derail things. So the function of planning is questionable. Like, can one still have master plans? What is their place in rapidly evolving cities?
Thank you so much, Blake. This is a very, very interesting point. If anyone from Team 2, please, a lot of things from Team 2, so please, if anyone can just go us through the main points there, that would be great.
I try and put in the points for Team 2, but maybe if I could ask my team members to jump in for anything that might be missing. Let me just quickly get a chance to go onto the mural. So some of the things that were mentioned was a need for like guidelines for planning to be more flexible, and that a big discussion we had was around informality as well, which is that we don't seem to be resolving the informality problem. And so perhaps that should be a starting point, is understanding what cities need first before jumping straight into the plan, framing the plan around resolving the actual challenges that we're seeing in our built environment and allowing for things such as informality to grow organically. The issue then becomes, if you don't plan for what seems to be a challenge, you don't necessarily get solutions that resolve that problem. And a good way in which it was illustrated by one of our team members was that you build a new city, but then a few years down the line, sometimes within months, you then start seeing this one thing, which is informality, that you consider to be a problem creeping back in. And so you realize that you haven't necessarily solved the problem, but rather masked it. So we're sort of like now starting to think through, well, how do you then build cities that are responsive to people's actual needs on the ground? And then some of the things that we were thinking of were, for example, how do you invest in infrastructure and how do you finance cities? So there's opportunity in, for example, developing bankable plans. There's a benefit in identifying new and creative ways of financing mechanisms. Something that I found interesting, and I hope I did not misquote the input, was basically how do we shift from PPP being like public-private partnerships to include people? And so maybe something that could be patented from that discussion is that it shouldn't be PPP, it should be more so like quadruple PPP. So I think the essence of our discussion was putting people first. And then one other thing to note was also the question around, well, who takes the lead for these actions to sort of materialize. So there are a lot of players, but I don't know if we fully resolved it, but the idea is that everyone has a role to play in shaping the cities that we live in. But there still remains that question of who should take the lead.
Okay, thank you so much. Those are very, very interesting ideas, and I think we're going to touch on a lot of those in our second part in our conversation today. And I'm just going to hand over to Team 3. Before I hand over to Team 3, does anyone want to like give a comment on Team 1 or Team 2, or like just add something or think, oh, this is a really great idea, I never thought about it before? If you want to add something, just like raise your hand and we can have a discussion about it. If not, we can just move on to Team 3. If anyone from Team 3 can unmute themselves and start speaking, this would be great.
Mr. Davis, would you like to speak?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I could give a brief summary for our team. So it was basically around like one of the main ideas was the community, the lack of community in what's being developed out, because so as we were talking, Mr. Davis and Mrs. Ninke, I need to get a name right, Mr. Ninke. Well, so we were saying like how if we are copy pasting in the new development of cities, we're copy pasting from other cities that we know out there. So it's not essentially an identity of the city that's trying to be developed, right? We don't know what they want out of it, and we don't know. Maybe they have their own ideas, or that could be something very different, very intricate for that city. So we were thinking also how community is missing from much of the development of that city. Like the lack of public spaces where people can get together, socialize, and understand what they want from that space or from their neighborhood itself to develop in an organic way. And we think of how to include community in ways where you can have exercises, for example, where you include children to see what they have in their mind, what they hope to visualize the city to be, maybe the children or the general public, and activities to include true public participation so you understand what you can develop for the city. And also to, but not cars, because most of the cities are very car oriented, which means they become really big, much bigger than needed, and people have trouble getting to where they want to go. I mean, like it takes like 20 minutes or much more longer to get to work or where we need to go. And you forget about the people in these cities too. And have I missed something out? Mr. Davis, Ms. Brown, if you'd like to chip in.
Yeah, just perhaps I can add to that, just saying that especially in Africa where we have colonial cities, the cities were based on the interests of the elite. So even in a post-colonial city, the same thing manifests where we have, for instance, Nairobi. They displaced tens of thousands of people. They built the expressway. It's a toll road, so ordinary people can't afford to use it. And the communities that were displaced get no benefit from that. And it's purely so people can get into the CBD from the suburbs in 20 minutes instead of 2 hours. It's the same thing in my city here in Harare. So we need to flip the paradigm. It has to put people at center stage, like Barcelona and other model cities that we look to in our visions.
Okay, thank you, teams. I'm just gonna stop sharing for a second. And a lot of your ideas are things that we have been discussing, have been thinking about, have been trying to kind of, I don't know, visualize. And I think what we try to kind of work on is to have as much of specific problems as possible. So we can try to find specific answers, and we try to corner the main three problems of new city making in three main points. First thing is, most of them, actually like 90% or 99% of them of new cities they're all master plans, and the master plans are overly rigid or restrictive, or as Team One has mentioned, they treat the space as a blank slate. There is no indication to vegetation or no indication to any culture or any even connections to the outside of the thing. And most of the new developments in Africa or development of new cities in Africa are master planned. The second thing is the high upfront capital cost. So if you're starting the city from scratch on a land that doesn't really have infrastructure connections, then it costs a lot, which drives up the prices of the units of the city higher, because most of the cities usually end up attracting upper to middle classes, while the bigger need is within the lower classes or in the middle classes. And the third thing is the extraordinary decision-making process. Most of new cities are, as we said, are master planned, so they're usually it's a developer, whatever is government or a private developer or whatever, who comes in and decides everything from day one till the end of the development of the city. But on the other hand, we look at cities like Hong Kong or Singapore, and we see that, you know what, like those cities did spur urban economic development. They did, especially in the case of, if we look at Shenzhen, it did solve some market barriers by somewhat attracting outside investments to the city and working by different rules. And cities like Singapore, they do provide a place for innovation, a place for growth, since we have better and more flexible rules. So we do see both what can new cities do, what can new planned cities do, but we also see the problems of new planned cities in Africa. And our main idea is that there is a huge mismatch between what is needed. You know, we had like our earlier rant of the thing that we are suffering from in our cities, and we talked a lot about homelessness. We talked about a lot about like things being super expensive and not inclusive to communities. And then when we look at what our current cities are, our new cities are being built, they are basically going through the same problems. So if we kind of went through all of the things that you guys have mentioned in the negatives of new cities, we can see that most of the connection of the negatives of new cities is basically the problems of master planning and decision making, which makes it very exclusive, and it makes it just completely ignores community, ignores almost everything around it. And from there, we kind of try to, okay, let's see what can we do, how can we do master planning different, how can we do decision-making processes different, that we can actually try to solve these things. So part two is I'm going to try to like introduce to you our thinking, our ideas about the organic growth, which is a bit of a paradigm shift in city making, and then we're going to have a discussion about this paradigm and see if it works. As we all know, the United Nations said that there is going to be an increase by over 20 million people, 2 billion people by 2050. I wish we were just 20 million, but we're a lot more. And 90% of that, the urbanization will happen in African and Asian cities, which leaves Africa's cities' main challenge is to actually plan for and effectively accommodate that rapid urban growth. And new cities has been proposed as a policy solution to address rapid urbanization across the global south. And if we look at urban planning in general, we're going to see that urban planning is a discipline of shifting paradigms. And right now we moved away from, the functional modern planning, which segregated function. We moved away from ideas like the golden cities, and we're working a lot towards community development, focusing on the communities and focusing on placemaking, focusing on the people themselves, rather than focusing on cars and these kinds of ideas. But unfortunately, that shift has not translated at all to new city making. And until a deliberate shift happens in new city making, the new cities that are being built are going to basically suffer from the same challenges and from the same problems that our current cities are suffering from, but they are being developed in the same mentality that or in the same ideas that in a lot of cities around the world we have moved on from. And this is why we're proposing the guided organic growth, and we're centering it around three main ideas. The first idea is looking at new city making as a shared sphere of activities. So looking at how we can build a city as a combination of the developer, the community, and the host country kind of working together and working on towards those activities. And from here, we kind of reference a lot the informal settlements of Cairo in Egypt. And if when you say informal settlements or we say slums, you always think of 1-story, 2-story high buildings. But actually, if you go into the informal settlements of Cairo, they're almost 14-story high with complete access to water and electricity. And how that happened, it happened through kind of differentiation. I mean, it wasn't something that was kind of planned from the beginning, but the process of how they developed is actually really interesting. Because when people just came into the land and they start building their 1- or 2-story houses, and then at a certain point, the government kind of provided those houses with electricity and water. Those houses managed to flip very fast and move from 2- or 1-story houses to multiple story houses, and actually developed one of the most diverse economic bases in all of Cairo are found in the informal settlements, because then people can use ground floors in the way they like, or they can use their double their rooms as also an economic activity. So just by kind of separating those different activities and seeing, and everyone kind of coming in, the people that are building their houses while the government is providing the main infrastructure, we found that you can actually build huge settlements very well. And those settlements you can literally just walk right next to a lot of them and you wouldn't even know that they're informal, just by the government stepping up and providing that infrastructure and the people doing the rest. The second thing is also an idea that we discuss a lot and we talk a lot about in planning. It's basically the combination of top-down and bottom-up processes, but the implementation of that in new city making. And here we reference development of the town of Ariana, probably butchering the name, in India. And what they did here was really interesting. So the developer of the government, they came in and they developed the actual infrastructure of the land, and they provided kind of advisories through a team of architects on how you can build your house, but they let the people build. What this did is that it cut a lot of the infrastructure cost almost in half by letting people do what they do in informality, which is built, but also maintained, streets, maintained easier access to infrastructure, maintained somewhat of a uniform look for the area. And it was more of like a top-down, going back and forward together with the communities. And it's actually a pretty vibrant town that exists. The third thing is new city making as a short and long-term processes. Again, we see with all of those new cities that we have studied, this urgency of finishing everything up from the front so people can move in, which again increases the capital required for those cities and make them eventually expensive. If we look at how we naturally build cities, if we look at informality all over Africa, we look at it developed over time. Even if we reflect back on those informal settlements we referenced at the beginning in Cairo, we see that in the 90s they were 2 stories high, but then something happened and then now they're bigger. So people build over time. We can see that basically all over Africa or even in South America with the extended columns, people kind of build certain floors and then they leave those extended columns because they know once they accumulate more capital, once there is more money, we can then add another floor. And just thinking that building a new city, even if you want to build a new city from scratch, you don't have to build everything up front, can really cut down on that capital and make it more accessible. Now we again see that beautiful green box, which means it's fun time for you guys. And what we're gonna do is that, let me start sharing my screen and share the mural link. Oh, here's it. Okay, and we're gonna also go into 3 teams, and here we're gonna discuss the 3 principles that I just talked about. Those 3 principles are very kind of vast, and mainly they make sense, kind of, but how, I think what we kind of want you guys to discuss is how can they actually be implemented specifically to new city making. So for instance, the first principle we discussed right now is new city making as a shared sphere of responsibilities, right? And how can you like categorize this those activities, and then how can you deliver them? So for instance, we'll give you an example of public infrastructure having like essential and non-essential items, essential like electricity, water, blah, 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 which it can then looked at as one sphere of activities that, for instance, the responsibility of can go to the host, to the government or the national government, to the local government, while non-essential infrastructure, like for instance, the development of, I don't know, sidewalks or more recreational infrastructure can go for maybe I don't know, like the private sector or something like this. So from that idea, then we can say, okay, yeah, we can categorize activities according to that. For instance, team 2, we also said that new city making as a combination of top-down and bottom-up activities. Then we gave you kind of a little tip towards how can we implement that. For instance, top-down, something like establishing the governing structures or the governing frameworks of a new city. That can be something that's more top-down, while bottom-up can be something like more of urban design, can be something that is exploring the more bottom-up aspects to it. New city making as short and long-term processes. We talk about like demarcation of public spaces versus the actual development of public spaces. So for instance, on a short-term process, we can say, hey, this is a public space, but we're not going to invest a lot of money into it until the communities actually starts coming in and the people have more money to develop the public space, and then the development of the public space can happen on a more longer-term money, so you can actually cut on the costs. So it kind of gave you like the 3 principles that we're working with, and you guys should go in there and think about how those 3 principles can be applied to actual cases in new city development. Also, you are free to critique that principle and say, or add something to it, or discuss it in the groups. You guys have 15 minutes, and Christy is gonna be kind enough to start putting you into Groups. Principle 1, we're going to go for group 1 or breakout room 1, breakout room 2. Principle 2 and Pre-Colonial 3 for Principle 3. If anyone doesn't understand what I just said or doesn't really understand what they're going to do, please unmute yourself right now, and then we can talk about it a bit. Got everything clear? Okay, then you guys are gonna start going to your rooms. Thank you. Please join the link or the invite that Christy is gonna send you. Hey everyone. Sorry, I know this session was really short, but we're running a bit over time. So just get into it, and team one, I'm gonna start sharing my screen, and then team one, somebody from team one can just tell us what you guys talked about, main points. I see you still adding some things, but let's. Okay, anyone from team one?
I think Mr. Adan, would like to say something. Okay. Should I explain this out for team one? Okay. Okay. So we were talking about how so the city making is a shared activity. So the main public infrastructure that's essential would be water, electricity, waste management. But what was also important was health centers, community health centers, so you can understand what's needed through the community, and there could be a source of information. And also pedestrian-friendly infrastructure and shops for economic activity, so that could boost what each individual neighborhood is producing as an identity. So, and as a way to make sure everybody is working together. So it's to make sure that the host, the government is at the top as a lead, because that's the national institution. So the government as a lead, and they identify what the community needs, maybe through the community centers or by walking around or through public participation. And then also they think about what infrastructure they're lacking, and they take the initiative to make that happen through the urban developer. So they handle both and moderate up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Nadia. Maybe somebody from team 2 can walk us a little bit through about what they thought about the principle, and like what are the main things that you thought about. Apparently a lot of things, but just maybe the main things very quickly. Anyone from team 2, please?
Yes, so from team 2, some of the key things that came out, I think good summaries can be seen on the yellow post-its, which is community mapping of resources and needs is vital. We need to establish strong community groups like residents. And then a question that was posed was whether representative democracy is failing, or rather maybe even twisting that to what needs to be done to ensure that representative democracy actually works. And then the need for development aid structures. And so what we were responding to here was whether new city making needs to be a combination of top-down and bottom-up processes. And the consensus was that definitely that is needed. And so a very standout statement from our discussions was that development should not be done to people, but rather with people. And what we are seeing in reality is the actual opposite, where a lot of development is more so focused on just hearing people for the sake of hearing them, but not actually having their inputs have decision-making power. And so we need to see things such as community representation in planning forums where there's a good representation of community representatives, and not just people who represent the community, but people who have those lived experiences, so that they're able to feed in, and on top of that, have their decisions have have their inputs have actual decision-making power.
Okay, thank you so much, Team 2. This is actually very insightful. We're going to go now to Team 3, and if you can tell us the main ideas that you thought about, that would be great. Anyone from Team 3?
I can start. So we were thinking that the new city making is more of an ongoing process that never finishes rather than a short and a long-term process. And that it also needs to acknowledge the past, that it doesn't just kind of start at a point and move forward. And you need to take into account both what's already been there from a human perspective and the ecological function of the space. That, you know, is it in a floodplain or is it serving an ecological function, and how do you build around that rather than just over it? Looking at how to mark areas that need to be preserved for public space. If it's in a kind of more informal evolution, how do you make sure that certain places are reserved for the general good or public good?
Okay, thank you so much, Blake. And I think it's a very interesting and a very good add to think about new city making as a process that never finishes, because in reality, it really does never finishes. Thank you, guys. And I'm just gonna not go into a 10-minute solo rant. It's gonna be more of like a 2-minute because we're about to finish. We just wanted to give you a couple of really good examples of how new city making or how new town development can happen. The Science and Services project in the Novo neighborhood in Dar es Salaam. What the government did, or what the main entity did, is that they provide water access, unpaved roads, formal plots, and some schools and clinics, and they basically let the people build. And that approach resulted in better infrastructure, quality housing, most importantly, it was way more affordable for those classes who moved in. And with this one of the projects that can be a little bit older, and we can see the land values of those places rising over time. So if you actually build in these places, you're going to make money over time, which is always a great idea. The second case study that we also really like is Ethiopia Urban Expansion Initiative. And the initiative followed a very simplified and decentralized plan, and there was a lot of top-down, bottom-up decision-making, where they actually included the community in road grids, in public spacing establishments, of a new settlement from scratch. So this is one of the really cool examples of how you can include surrounding communities and also native communities in the process of developing a new settlement. In our kind of like main implementation points that we can take from this, the first one is the demarcation of public and private functions. I think, as Team 3 mentioned, it's important to kind of demarcate public spaces and then develop it over time. And the other thing, the other idea that we're talking about is the gradual infrastructure and services provision over time. So the change or the distinction between essential and non-essential services is really important in a new development. Thank you guys so much for your participation. Your active participation wouldn't have happened for you if it wasn't for you guys. You all have access to the mural, so you can go back and add your ideas at any point. If you want to have more of an insightful discussion about the planning guidelines or what we're doing at the Church Institute, please reach out to me. I'm always open to having an online discussion. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much, and thank you, Red Africa, for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Hiba.
Thank you, Nadia, for coming back.